So those of you coming in, you are listening to the In Kinship podcast, a podcast for makers who crave a vibrant life on their own terms. I'm your host, Tina Vandenberg, and today's guest, Ann Tilley, I think really embodies the idea of living life on her own terms. And I would say vibrantly, because I've seen the glow in her face, and I think this looks like a happy-go-lucky human. And I'm thrilled to talk to her. Ann, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Tina. I'm excited to be here.
Good. Those of you who are coming on, before I do an official introduction to Ann, feel free to put any questions you might have in the chat. Feel free to put any comments you might have. At the end of our show today, we will open that up so you can come in and you can talk with us if you want, or I can read your questions. We're excited to have you here, and I'm just grateful. So before we officially get started, I probably did the introduction a little soon. I might do it again for people to alter it. Ann and I were just chatting about the weather because I find it fascinating. I don't know if that means that I'm getting old or what, but I'm like, so what's the weather like at your house? Ann, what's the weather like at your house?
It's incredibly dry and mid 90s, pretty much, like brutally hot. Although we did have a little bit of overcast weather, so I could get some stuff watered. But yeah, it's been pretty brutal.
And where are you calling from?
Central North Carolina. So today I live more rurally, but today I'm in Greensboro, downtown Greensboro at my local maker space that I spend a lot of time in. And I'm now an official employee. So
that's so exciting. I love seeing, if you're not listening to the podcast, excuse me, if you don't see the video or you're not here live and you're listening, you might not know this, obviously, because I'm just rambling here. Behind Ann's head are tons of beautiful cones of yarn. And it's really fun to see that. And I can just imagine all of the artwork that must happen. Tell us a little bit about the makerspace while people come in.
yeah, so the makerspace is a nonprofit space, and they call it like a gym for makers. So you get a monthly membership, and you get 24/7 access to the building. And then there's different studios. So there's a wood shop, a metal shop, a ceramic studio, a textile studio, and really what the tools here and the resources here have really been a result of a lot of the volunteers that have come and said, I have this skill, I want to share it with other people. And so I've been a volunteer for a long time, and I helped set up the textile studio. And then now we're at a point where they're able to hire me, not for very much, like one day a week thing, but I basically can now get paid to maintain the space, which means that I can do even more, like I have more time to it. But this has really just become the place where, for one thing, I work from home. So if I ever wanted to meet clients or do anything, I can meet people here rather than come to my house. But then the community I've met has really become my friend group and my social group. And my husband's also active in the space, and he calls it his church. So it's totally just a place for like-minded people. I've gotten a lot of inspiration and input on my small business through all of the skills that are here. So I love it.
That is so awesome. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
It's called the Forge Greensboro is what it is, what the makerspace is called. So
I live in a pretty rural area of northern Michigan. So I'm like, oh, I wish we had something like that. Because Ann and I, before we started the call, we were just talking about that as people who work on their own business or just work from home, it can be kind of I'm saying that it can be kind of a lonely existence sometimes. And I thought, wow, to go into this makerspace and have all these like-minded, dynamic people to talk to would be really amazing.
Oh, certainly. And like when I started my sewing pattern business, it's a lot of Adobe Illustrator, and I wasn't familiar with it. And there's peers here that are like Adobe instructors that could sit down and walk me through things. And then they also had like Adobe suites on the computer. So I could come in here and work and get started until I got to a place where I was like, okay, I need to have this on my own computer. And so yeah, it's just been, and also there's air conditioning here. So we're not at my home studio today because I actually wanted to sit in air conditioning. So
I love it. And I can't wait to talk about your studio. Before we do that, I want to just read this quick comment from Carol. I know I said I'd do it at the end, but it just feels fun to do it right now. So I'm going to. Carol Johnson says, I've been looking at the magic pants pattern and wonder if a mid heavier stretch weight denim would be a good choice. It seems like it might not drape. And I'm also wondering how the rib knit could be affected and if it needs to change the weight of the rib knit. Wow, she has a very specific question. Thank you, Carol.
Wow. Well, I have seen people make this out of like a standard stretch denim, like a 2% stretch denim with a lot of success. And I think that it'd be fine with the rib knit because really the rib knit panel is only to help you get the garment over your hips. And then once you buckle it in, it's basically useless at that point. It's just kind of a placeholder until you take the pant off again. So I don't think that that would put any strain on it. You know, it's really just that hip that you need that ribbing and to hold things together.
Very nice. So everyone listening to this who is not familiar with you, if that, are out there, they're like, what are magic pants? What are we talking about? Let me do the introduction and then we'll get into that more in depth, what magic pants are, and also some more about the intentional living that I mentioned at the beginning. So you are listening to the In Kinship podcast. I'm here with Ann Tilley. Ann has a business called Ann Tilley Handmade. She's a textile artist working in color knitting. She's a clothing and pattern designer and instructor as far as sewing, clothing, and garment construction. After earning her BFA in fashion and fiber, she worked in a variety of small-scale garment studios and now teaches and sells her own original patterns. And she lives in a self-built tiny house, which also happens to be off-grid. And welcome.
Can you tell that I don't like to sit still? So
yeah, I relate to you very much. I don't think of myself as somebody who does a lot. And then my neighbors are like, wow, you get so much done. I'm like, no, I don't. My list is this long. I don't even remotely get to it. But
yeah, you're always excited about the next thing. Not that we don't appreciate what we've got, but I mean, I have big plans for what I want my compound to look like, so
yeah.
And I also have a very ambitious husband who's a woodworker. So we're always scheming on the next project.
Very fun. So before we move on to the compound that you're talking about, for those of our listeners who might not completely know, what does it mean to be off-grid?
So it basically means that I don't rely on any outside utilities. I mean, I guess you could say I still have internet, but I do have like a mobile hotspot internet. But I have my own private well, and then we have our own solar system. So if it was an on-grid solar, it would be solar that would be connected to, in our case, Duke Energy. But here it's like we are solely in charge of our electricity. And if it goes out, it's our responsibility. But it's pretty amazing in terms of, like last week I was listening to the news and they were saying heat wave means people are going to use more electricity because they're going to use more air conditioning and we might have blackouts. But something like that would not affect me at all because I'm not attached to that grid. So that was like kind of a wild when I like heard that and realized what that meant, how that did not affect me. It was like, whoa, like that's different,
Yeah. How does that feel?
Oh, I mean, it's phenomenal because my whole desire has been to find a way to reduce my own impact on the environment and find a way to live a life aligned environmentally. And so, Duke Energy is this giant monopoly where we are and, constantly price gouging people. So the idea that I can not put my money towards that company that is like polluting our lands and price gouging us and can do it myself is really empowering. And then the idea that if something was to happen to the grid, that I have a level of self-sufficiency there is really thrilling.
It is. I wonder if this is the case for you too. So I consider myself a prepper, not in like the traditional prepper sense per se, but in the like I love to have things in place so that I can be self-sustaining, right? I'm not necessarily like, I don't have a bunker full of guns per se, but I do have, I'm all over the place. Let's just go back to this. But I do get a lot of joy out of knowing that like I can take care of myself if I need to. I have the skills I need to do the things I need to do. I don't have a garden yet on my new property, but like that's in the works. It's in the plans. But I did plant apple trees and pear and a peach tree and berries and all these other things that I know they're going to give me food in a longer term way. And I have been toying with the idea of like building a cellar on my property, like all these things. Like these have always thrilled me.
Me too. 100% agree to everything you just said. Me
Yeah.
too.
Right. And that's really, well, I came at sewing clothing from two different directions. One was that I had trouble finding clothing that I was satisfied with how they fit my body. And the other was that I didn't want to be part of a system. I wanted to have my own control over the things I was putting on my body and the way it was made. And so it was definitely a dual thing coming together for me. I wonder if the same is for you.
I honestly think I came more to self-sufficiency after like understanding that sewing and making my own clothes could help me be in that way. I think it evolved later for me. I
Yeah.
really just became obsessed with the sewing machine as a kid and wanted to explore its possibilities. And then, of course, you want to dress in a certain way. And then the fast fashion thing, it was like, oh, I want to be autonomous and
Mhm.
think about it more from that direction. But the nice thing about sewing your own clothes is there's so many wins to be had,
Yeah.
whether it's custom for yourself or you're supporting fast fashion or you're using upcycled materials and you're being environmentally sensitive or there's so many ways that it's a beneficial hobby.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Cause I'm like, there are so many values I have that are tied into sewing clothing for myself. So your compound, as you mentioned earlier, I love that word. I'm probably going to use it 700 times tonight. It consists of a tiny house that was self-built by you and your husband. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Tell us
Yep.
about that
Go ahead.
tiny house. And then let me continue that. So it consists of the tiny house that was self-built by you and your husband. And it also has a Quonset hut studio that is yours. And
Mhm.
I believe your husband has a studio there as well.
Yes. So he is about to be finished with it. So he just put up, it's actually going to have its own solar system. So he put up the solar panels yesterday for that building. So he hasn't quite moved in, but we're getting very, very close. And then there's also a small like garden shed that we built to house the solar system for our main house. So before we even moved, we built the shed and we set up the solar panels, and then the shed holds, our inverter and our breaker box and everything. And then we set up the Quonset hut as like the general storage, and then my studio's in the back because working from home, and I needed a place for my business to land when we moved.
Yeah.
And so it's not the most perfect studio, but it's the best studio I've ever had. You keep kind of inching your
Yeah.
way up. Just, heat and air conditioning is like my next goal for my next studio. So the long term, eventually we're going to build a whole detached studio for me. And I'm hoping to kind of YouTube video record that process for anyone who'd be
Yeah.
interested in seeing how I'm going to design and build that. But we don't have to necessarily rush that project because I'm in a good space now.
Yeah.
So that was nice to not feel like I was having to wait to get there. It was like, okay, get yourself set up here and then, we'll see. I mean, he's like, I thought he'd be exhausted after building this building, but on the way to work today, he was like, okay, so well, you're for your studio, like, what do you envision? I'm like, man, you are ready. Like,
I love it. And I do want to say, I'm going to put a picture I have of you. It's your headshot that you sent to me, and it has your studio behind you in it. And because I think your studio is stunning. I think that maybe it's not perfect in like in all the ways that you could envision it being different, but it's really an attractive space. And so I'll put that in the show notes for those of you who want to check that out. Um, I want to talk about solar panels just for a moment because I have a tiny house as well. It's 400 square feet, which I think is the same square footage
yeah,
as yours. Yeah. I did not build it myself, but I did gut it and refinish the inside. And I worked as a carpenter in my 20s. I feel like you and I are just like we have a lot of parallels going on. But when I first had the little house and I first was divorced and I was looking for property, I toyed really strongly with the idea of going off grid and finding property where I was completely off grid. And I was thinking of maybe even water catchment. I had a composting toilet at the time. I lived in the little house on a friend's property for 2 years and I had a composting toilet, but I was attached to their electric grid just via an extension cord. So it was like very, very little that I could actually run. But when I was in that research phase, when I was looking into that, it felt like solar panels and the inverters and the batteries and all that felt like a really big learning curve. Did you find that to be the case?
Well, I mean, to be fair, my husband was mainly the one who was like the fearless one that felt like he could just do it. And he did.
Right.
Which is, I mean, I feel like half of it is just having the balls to say that you're willing to try.
Right. Right.
And, I mean, really, it keeps getting easier every year, this stuff. And it really is sort of a plug and play situation where it's like you put your panels up, you plug it to an inverter, then the inverter goes to the breaker box. And so it's like sometimes with the sewing machine where it feels like this very complicated thing, but then you're like, oh, there's just some lint on this thing that's keeping it from working, and I just need to put some oil on it. And so I think it can look intimidating before you start researching. But I know that there's one single guy on YouTube who just has like the best videos, and he pretty much just watched all of his videos
Nice.
and he worked with a couple of good companies that then also gave him input on how to put it all together. But we moved onto land that had never been lived on before. And so it was going to cost us, over $5,000 just to get a landline, a power line come in. So we kind of were like, well, if we're going to put all this money into that, then we're never going to get to our off-grid days. And so we were like, we might as well take that money and invest it into our own system.
Right.
So it was mostly him, to be fair. But of course, I've learned a lot too on the way. And I mean, I really think it's just the fearlessness to start asking questions and researching, watching the YouTube videos to get started. And it keeps getting easier every year and cheaper.
Right. Nice. Right. Because you mean because your main expenditures have already occurred, or because just the nature of solar electricity is becoming cheaper?
Yeah. Just like there's incentives, there's more people making it, and it's just
Yeah.
like it's becoming more accessible for sure. So
Right.
I do think it's just going to keep getting easier for people to get into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. So tell us about building your tiny house.
Yeah. So again, this was my husband being like, I want to build my own house. And I was like, oh, this is incredibly overwhelming, but, I had no money to really, I had no idea how I was going to own a home. But of course, that was a dream. I wanted to get out of the rental house. And I just didn't know how that was going to happen. And we were lucky enough to inherit some land. And so then it was kind of like, okay, well, we weren't sure if we were going to be happy living on the land. But it was such a great gift that it was like, okay, we need to see if we can do something with this. So building the tiny house on wheels made a lot of sense for us because we weren't sure if we were going to be happy on the property. There was no power or anything on the property. So we were able to build the house behind our rental house, which was very convenient in terms of electricity and everything, and then be able to move it when we were ready. And so we spent maybe a year designing and then slowly building. We were both still working. So I think it was like over the course of like 5 years, we built the building, which I mean, it's like you watch some of those videos and they just like put it together like that. But, it took us a lot longer and I had to kind of stymie my expectations of how long it was going to take, considering that neither of us have construction skills per se. Like my husband comes from a furniture making background. And so it was like two novices coming in. But it's each day, each project was a thrill to be like, oh, okay, I researched this and I implemented this and it worked, and then we spent, a couple of years getting the land set up because we had to get a well put in. We don't have a septic system. So because we're a house on wheels, we're not required to have a septic system. And so that enabled us to do the dry toilet and do a gray water system for a runoff, which is what I prefer in terms of I don't want to have to pay a lot of money for a septic system to be dug into my woods and you know
Yeah.
so that's been a new change of lifestyle doing all that. But um yeah, I totally thought I was like, I can make all my own clothes, I can make my own house. And it definitely was a reality check. But then we did it and it
Yeah.
worked. And then it's like funny because people are like, so you live in it? I'm like, yeah, like it works. Like we
Did it
can do
fall
it.
down around your ears?
I mean, when they pulled it out of the driveway, I hadn't slept for like a week because I was like, it's going to explode. All the windows are going to shatter. Like every horrible thing was going to happen.
Right.
It was being pulled out. Of course, none of that happened.
Nice.
Uh, so it's amazing how, yeah, the things I feared the most ended up never being a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, we love it. We've been in it for about 2 years now.
Very nice. Very nice. So when I ended up finding property, it ended up being um not what I was expecting. I was expecting to be someplace out in the country more so, and I was going to have this off-grid existence and all of these things. And then I found property that just really spoke to me and it ended up being in a residential zoned area. So I had to do things that I didn't necessarily. You have to make those compromises. So I put the electric in and it was like $5,000 and the septic and all of those things happened. And then I had this issue with my septic last week and I'm like, I never had these issues when I had a composting toilet, which of course is sort of ludicrous, but I was like, ah. But that's all taken care of and cleaned up. But um, what do you love about living in a tiny house?
Well, I mean, I joke that the main reason I built a tiny house was because I didn't want to clean, and I just had the smallest, but it's true. Like I can clean my entire bedroom in 15 minutes
Right.
and dust it. And I love the intentionality of the space because since we designed it for us, I made a huge kitchen. So it's a full size kitchen because I knew that mattered to me. And then I allowed other things to be smaller. And it's far from perfect because, of course, if I was to build it all over again, I would have the knowledge of the first one. But I love the fact, like, I know this is so little, but like I have a little container that I keep all my nail polish in. And I brought a new nail polish and it didn't fit. And so it was like, okay, well, I have to get rid of one. And it's like in the past, I would just hold on to things forever.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay. And then especially because we've been in the house for 2 years now, it was like, oh, well, I've never used this nail polish in 2 years. So like I have a date of knowing. So it's like, get rid of it. And so I love the limitations that it puts on keeping me from expanding
Yes.
in that way. Although, I could use some more closet space, but I kind of see that might be most people.
For sure. What let me just say, like, this resonates with me so deeply. I actually, through the years, like, I've done a lot of studying on myself, like figuring out, I believe that the more we know ourselves, the better chance we have at happiness is like, I guess is like a belief that I have. Like the more that we understand what brings us happiness, the more that we understand what stresses us out, the more that we just understand ourselves as people. And so I know about myself that if I have too many things, whatever that is, I get stressed. I get stressed by the amount of things that I can have. And that is, I'm not a minimalist, as you can see behind you. Like that's not my either, but I like having limitations on the size of things. And so I completely resonate with the nail polish scenario. And it happens in my house a lot too. But I also have an 8-year-old who's a freaking hoarder, right? I mean, he's not truly a hoarder, but he feels like a hoarder.
Like that. No, they can hold on to
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. And so like he shares my studio. So over there, he's got a space in my studio and it's like full of all the things. And like he'll like mine through the recycling bin, which is great, right? Because he wants to make things out of those things in recycling. But like he'll like hang on to them. I'm like, babe, there's gonna be more recycling next week. I promise you. And he's like, but mom, this could be something. And I'm like,
No.
so
Yeah. I mean, I'm at a maker space right now. It's
yeah.
literally all people that think that everything has potential. But yeah, I mean, I do think that, the downsizing process, we spent years. Like I honestly think that downsizing is a skill that you build. It's a muscle you build. And it takes a lot of psychology to assess things, go back and look in drawers and clean things out. and learning how to let go of things is
Right.
like, I mean, I don't think that that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And I do think it takes repetition and practice. And I mean, we lived in, before we moved, we had a 1,200 square foot house, which for a lot of people would be small. But I remember there was a room that I didn't really use and I just would pile stuff in it. And it gave me so much guilt that I didn't use that room. And so
Yeah.
that's how I knew. I was like, a tiny house I think is gonna be good for me because I somehow, for some reason, I have guilt about things that I'm not using. So
Yeah.
this will force me to like let go of those things and hopefully get purge some of that guilt that I have.
Right. I resonate with that as well. And that idea of like learning what is enough and how that feels in your body. Like, this is enough. This is what I need. This this will fill all these needs that I have and I'll be okay in this space. Do you see yourself living? I mean, obviously no one knows what the future might hold, but do you see yourself living in your tiny house forever?
You know, we built the house on wheels because we were kind of thinking, oh, well, maybe we'll live in this for a period of time and then we'll move it and we'll build a permanent house or, something. But now that we're in it, I mean, I'm totally happy. It's kind of a thrill to be like, this is a forever home for me. Like, I'm going to be here forever. I'm going to invest in this rock, irrigation or this like
Yeah.
out garden with like ridiculous love and care because I want to stay here.
Yeah.
And we have found that we absolutely love the location that we're in now. And we're rural, but we're very close to a lot of major cities. Like, after talking to you last time, I was like, I'm within an hour of three, local fabric stores. And I was
Right.
like, I didn't know how much I should appreciate that.
You should. That's
Yeah. As of right now, I mean, the things that I feel like I miss about the space is really just that I can't have dinner parties and have guests over as easily.
yeah.
So the music studio is going to also be a guest suite. So we'll have a full bathroom in there.
Yeah.
So we'll have a second bathroom, which will be great.
Mhm.
And then I guess I'll just have to build an outdoor dining table at some point. That's probably just not something that'll be in my life as a dining room,
Yeah.
It'll
Yeah.
just be, yeah, outdoors. So that's the other thing about tiny house living is it pushes me outside more, which was something that I wanted was to just be outside. And sometimes it can be so cozy and easy to stay inside. And so I love that component.
That reminds me of, have you ever read any of, I think it's Dan Buettner's books or seen his maybe Netflix series, The Blue Zones?
Mm-mm.
It's one of I read it probably, I don't know when it came out, but whenever it came out, I'm going to say 15, 20 years ago, but it might have been, time is hard to tell. So, he really, very simplified premise of the studies that he did is that he studied the zones or the areas in the world where people live the longest and had like the most healthy lifestyles and sort of were the happiest for the longest amount of time. And he then collated all of that information it down and he brought it into like 9 pillars of what all of those people had in some way in their life. And I love this. I love how when we can really fine tune something, we can see the simplicity of what we actually need, right? Like what we actually need to be happy or what we actually need to survive or all of those things. What's enough for us? And one of them in there is everybody in the blue zones lives in a walkable city or a walkable space. And
Mm.
I don't really myself, but I like the idea and what he puts out there is that when we live in ways where it's really natural and easy for us to do the things that we want to do. Like if you want to walk more and you live someplace where it's really simple to walk more, you're going to walk more. And I'm like, so I love the idea of taking those barriers down, which sounds like exactly what you're talking about. When living
Yeah.
in a small house takes away the barrier of like,
Well,
you
like
know,
I remember, so I grew up in the city and I grew up going to like the YMCA where you would get on a treadmill in front of a television in the air conditioning. And I remember being like, I hate this. Like I want to walk on a
Mhm.
nature trail.
Right.
And then our rental house, I would have to drive like 20 minutes to go walk on a nature trail. And I was like, this seems stupid. And so
Right.
now where we live, we're part of a bigger piece of family property, and we have these big walking trails. So I can literally just walk out my door down the hill and I'm on a trail, and I don't have to get in a car to get somewhere to. And so, yeah, talk about like a life goal. Like that means so much to me to have that access to, encouraging me to live healthier, and I don't have to drive anywhere, because that is the downside of the rural living, is being more tied to your car.
Yes.
Um, so
Yeah. So I also, the property that I have, it's not family property, but the person who owns the 20 acres behind me has walking trails and he lets me walk on them. And so like I give him honey because I have bees. So I'm like,
oh,
please
I
never
love
stop letting me walk on your trails because it's just so effortless. And it's like, it's amazing how just a small little hurdle can really derail our best intentions.
So we have been debating getting bees. Do you feel like there are a lot of maintenance?
Well, it depends on what you do. So I love the way that I keep bees. They don't always survive. I'm going to tell you that, like, just to be like the actual fact here, but I also live in a very cold climate. And so we don't have great retention, unfortunately, because we often are ordering our bees. They're coming from Georgia. We could have a whole podcast about this, but they're coming from Georgia, right? They get up here in May and they just came from Georgia and it's like 40 degrees here. And they're like, what is this? And then they're trying to exist here. And so I think that this is my own personal thought on this. I think it's challenging to bring a species that has been generationally grown in a much different climate up into northern Michigan. So I think that's part of why they don't last. We don't have as great a success in overwintering them here. However, let me simplify this answer. I do top bar hives, which I absolutely love. And so, I'm reading a book right now called Beekeeping with a Smile, I think is what it's called. I can't think of the author. But the idea that he has out there, he's an author that's coming from Russia, someplace in Russia, that has a climate kind of similar to my own, but he's really advocating for finding swarms so that you have bees that are at least have had a couple of generations of bees in your climate, right? And like finding swarms is not as hard as it seems per se. Like, so when I'm more settled here, I just moved in December. So when I'm more settled, I'm going to put some swarm lure traps up in my trees and see if I can catch some swarms. But one of the other premises is that bees know what they're doing. They don't need us to interfere, right? Like what they need is they need us. What we need actually is we need to produce bees in a way to where we can get into that and take the honey. So that's really the only reason that we might manage or that we should be. This is all
Okay.
that we should be managing the bees. So once I get my hive out there and I built the hive myself, and once I get the hive installed or hopefully it's overwintered, I'm just checking to make sure that there's evidence of the queen still, because then I might interfere if somehow the queen has died or something has happened or they've kicked her out or whatever might have happened. So I'm looking to make sure they have brood. But other than that, all I'm doing is managing their space. I'm making sure that their space is large enough, but not too big so that they don't want to like leave. Like I'm trying to make it so that the house is as nice for them as possible so that they'll stay in it. And so like I've been in it like twice this year, right? And I'll get into it. I'll look for signs. I'll walk by it every day or so, and I'll look for signs that they maybe are overcrowded, and then I'll add a little more space in there. So
Okay.
for me, it's really effortless. And then because I do a top bar hive, which doesn't have a frame, I can't spin out the honey, so I have to crush the comb, which has some advantages. The advantage is that I get a lot of wax, and also that it helps with some disease simply because they're not reusing some of that old comb. So it's like it takes some more energy to build the comb again, but it's also potentially helps us stop any issues that might be happening. Yes,
Fun.
I have a
I,
lot I can say.
I want to do all. I just want to do all the things. Like
Yeah, yeah.
we found a bunch of wild muscadine grapes growing on the property, and that was great fun to harvest those. And then we did the research to make the wine, and so I mean, it takes some effort and some research, and so we're trying to take good notes and stuff. But I want to do all the things. I want to have the cellar with the homemade everything, and
Yes, of course. Yeah. Well, I find bees to be really simple, but I know that I also have friends who are beekeepers that keep more traditional hive. And by traditional, I guess I mean more modern, the Langstrom white hives that you're probably really used to.
Right.
And they just are in there a whole lot more than I am. And you just are choosing which path you like. I like the hands-off path myself. So
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
yeah, you are welcome. So again, I think we could talk forever. Yeah, this could be a 2 or 3 hour podcast. But before we go too far in intentional living and off grid, which I think is fascinating, um, tell us more about your business and Tilley Handmade and those magic pans that got mentioned earlier on, and how you got to where you are right now, as far as
Yeah.
business goes.
Yeah. So I, took a traditional fashion college route and got the basics on pattern making, draping, design, construction. And then I worked in a couple small scale factories where I got to work really closely with the pattern makers and the designers. And I was usually some sort of technical worker bee. And then I just really got to where I was like starting to practice pattern making in my home studio, making things for myself. When I decided that I didn't want to buy clothes and I just wanted to make clothes, I used that as an impetus to practice, just with repetition. And I got to where then I started taking on clients and they would have a concept. I had this idea in my head that I was not a designer and that I was a technical designer. Like I was not a creative designer, which is ironic because I also identify as an artist, but I
Right?
did identify as a creative designer. And so I was like, what I like is the construction and the engineering. And
Right.
so, but then you have to design something to then construct and engineer the garment.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that was definitely a skill that I started to build is like, and then I started a couple of my own original clothing companies where I was designing the garment, making the garment, and selling it to customers.
Yeah.
Actually, in my first business, there was no sizes, and I would teach you how to measure your body, and they would just send the measurements in. And
Yeah.
I had one pattern that fit me, and then like using their numbers, I would cut out their garment, which of course was a lot of work, and I charging enough
Right.
still helped me build confidence. And then the side effect actually was that then I developed this whole book of all of these measurements of all of these people. And so then that started to help me understand when my next clothing line came around, we did, small, medium, large. And I was able to look at those numbers and it helped me to understand grading more and starting to see patterns in the body. And yeah, then with the next business, again, I was like building my skills as a designer. And actually with that business was when I did I freeze? Okay. Was when I developed the magic pants pattern. So that was originally going to be something that we were going to manufacture and sell. And then the business closed. And so I was sitting on this like really fun design
Mhm.
and I started teaching, my local fabric store was trying to get me to teach new classes. And I was like, well, I have this pant pattern. You want to try this? And then they were like, you should sell this pattern. And so I did not feel confident about knowing how to get there. But, thankfully
Sure.
for YouTube, like through the internet, through the community at the Forge, I was able to start first you just kind of look at other people that are doing it and start emulating. So eventually I figured it out. There's and people are making the pattern. And the magic pants have been incredibly successful considering that I'm only selling on my personal website and in a few local fabric stores. And so the only way that people are hearing about me is through word of mouth, Instagram, and YouTube, because I also have some YouTube videos out. And but I think people are loving the magic pants for so many reasons other than I even anticipated. I really designed it for me and what
Right.
I want to wear, but then the adjustability thing, people are all like the pant it flexes with your body. And also I just didn't really think about the fact that a lot of pants designs are just your typical zipper fly or there's some sort of zipper. And
Yeah.
so this is kind of a whole different construction.
Yeah.
But again, it's like you're alone in your house making these things, and then you don't really think about what you're, putting out there. So I really appreciate all the people who have reached out to me and said, thank you for this design and helping them in their life. And it just feels like an honor to be able to help other people feel good in their body and in their clothes. And I'm just going to keep it. So
So, for those of you listening, Anne was part of the Break the Rules of Sewing series that I did back at the beginning of May. And at that time, you were just releasing your second pattern or third pattern. You have an undies pattern too, right?
I also have some PDF only underwear patterns. But yeah, my second kind of big pattern was just coming out. And that had been about a year in between. So,
and that was the Endless Summer top.
sure. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Tell us, how did that come to be?
Again, that was another design that had started with the last clothing business. And I always, approach design where how I want something to function in my life. And so I wanted this, lightweight, summery garment. A lot of my designs are inspired by vintage construction techniques. And I'm that person that's always looking at the design details in the movies or on the street, like picking out things. And so it was sort of an amalgamation of a few designs that I had been enjoying wearing. And, the funny thing is, I came to fashion because I want to be dressed different than everyone.
Right.
And when you start to make clothes for people, then they start looking like you because then clothes, So I think it's kind of funny. So what it usually ends up happening is I usually have these prototypes that I'm wearing for a couple of years. And then I finally get the pattern together and I get it out there. And then by that time, I'm kind of tired of wearing it. And so I'll then that helps push me into the next new design and start working in that direction. So probably I have two more designs that are sort of like pretty close to coming out. But the beauty of this business model is that I can really choose to push to release them or not release them. So what I'm focusing on right now is making new designs for myself to start testing and wearing and start thinking about the next designs. And then I also have like a relatively active studio art practice. And so I'm thinking that the month August is my birthday month. So I was thinking for the month of August, I would just make art and let that be like my sort of art month. And so I love the fact that there's still that business side of me that's like, you need to be posting on Instagram. You need to be like working on the next pattern. And then it's like, I don't have to, like no one's saying that I have to come out with a new pattern every month. That's not the point of slow fashion. And I don't have to adhere to seasons like the way we used to do in the clothing business when you would make and sell clothing. So I'm still trying to navigate, what society tells me I should be doing, and in American society especially, go, and then what works for my lifestyle. And I'm still working on that. It is ebb and flow. Monday morning I wake up and I'm like, oh, and then it's like, no, you can go make yourself a swimsuit. It's okay. You go make yourself a swimsuit and go swim with your friends. It's okay.
Right. And then as an artist, and it's so hard to really ingrain this into your mind though, but part of the creative process is to make things.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah.
And if you stick behind a computer, then you're going to erode that side of you. And yeah, that's definitely something I've had to remember to be like this, like the playtime is when you come up with the new ideas. And so it is valid for you to spend a month just making clothes for yourself.
Yeah.
Or for your friends and family to figure out where your path is. So, I mean, I love making clothes so much that I had to figure out a business where I could do it, all the time. So I did.
I love that. I had a question that just jumped right out of my head. Oh, here's what it was. So as you're sharing this process, it sounds to me, tell me if this is wrong or right. It sounds to me like in your life, you have progressed simply by doing the thing, and then the next step sort of just appears or shows itself. Is that a fair statement?
Oh yeah, and I I think regularly about how different it would be if I actually tried to sit down and have a 1 year plan or a 5 year plan. Because usually I'm just like, okay, what do I need to get done in the next 2 weeks? That's my, and so I do struggle with big picture concept. And certainly when I got out of school, I had no idea what I was doing. People would say, oh, you should do this, you should do this. And I would kind of be like, okay, so I definitely have moved around based on feedback from my peers. And there's definitely been times where I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. And I don't have to do it just because I can do it, and so there has been a lot of false starts. But I mean, one of the beauties about starting a business is that you can stop it. And no, you're not a failure because you closed a business, and you just, so honestly, it's almost smarter to close a business if it's not working for you. Like my first clothing business, I wasn't making any money. And it was like, well, what's the point? Are you a charity?
Right.
Like the goal is to support yourself so that you can live. So you've got to rethink this.
Yeah, I love that. So as somebody who can spend a lot of time planning and I get a lot of joy from planning, right? So I'll be like, okay, so this year I'm going to do this launch and this launch and this launch, and then this is going to happen and that's going to happen and that's going to happen. And then like I rarely ever actually hit that plan, and then I get discouraged in myself and all these things happen. And I love to explore, and I love hearing a story like yours because I love to explore the ways in which in my own life there have been things that have just felt like the next right step, and I followed it and beautiful things have happened. And so I I have really adopted this path of like I can make a plan because it does make me feel good. It makes me feel good to have a plan. And then I'm just going to set it aside and I'm just going to continue forth. And if I end up being on that plan, great. And if I end up not, that's okay too, because I want to have that spontaneity and the flexibility to pivot as the next right thing seems good. Because as you're sharing your story, like there's so many points where that led you into something different. Like you gave you
Mhm.
the tools you needed to do the next part. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
Oh yeah, like I mean the second clothing line I had it with a business partner, and that ended up not being
Right.
uh and basically we were doing well financially, but then she kind of just like pulled the rug out and was like, "No, I don't want to do this anymore," and I felt very like, like I
Good.
put all this work into building this business and then it's just we're gutting it. But because of that business, I started to develop my skills as a designer and build my confidence there, which has then benefited the pattern business and has ultimately created the pattern business. And so there's no way that I can look at that and say that that was a race
Right.
by any means. And, so yeah, I think especially because came out of school with like literally no clue of what I wanted to do or what I wanted my life to look like. I just wanted a life where I didn't have a uniform and I had some flexibility in my schedule. Like I never wanted to work a conventional full-time job, and I never wanted to work corporate. That was like the only things I knew.
Right. Right.
And so I just, allowed it to kind of develop. And I'm so happy with the business model of the patterns, because I mean, even with the clothing company, I started the clothing company because I was discovering how amazing it was to wear ethically made, like well-fitting quality clothing. And I wanted to share that with people and help them not support fast fashion. But then it still was this thing where I had to convince people to pay, $150 for a garment. And that didn't align with me ethically. And so teaching people and providing them with the resources to make it for themselves just feels so much more in line with my values. And especially that totally applies with the intentional living of the house. Was like, I started to become addicted to this idea of like questioning what society expects of you, and then thinking about what you want your life to be and how can I align that up with my values as much as possible. So that was, and then so now I feel like I've actually hit that spot.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I love that. And I love that. I have one more question for you.
Yeah, I'm listening. I just have to get my charger.
No worries.
Dying.
Well, as you go get your charger, think about my final question is the one that I ask all of my guests. What do you wish people knew deep in their hearts that you think maybe they don't?
Oh my gosh. I know you sent me this question and I was kind of like, hmm, how do I answer this question? To be aligned deep in their hearts. I just, I just really, I know that I personally just love living life by my own sense of right and wrong and my own value system and not, listening to the man or listening to what your parents think you should do or what your community thinks you should do and really believe in living with the values that make sense to you. And maybe it's not living tiny, maybe it's not making your own clothing, but whatever it is that feels right to you, to me it's addictive. As soon as you live your values, then it's like like I told you, I was like, as soon as I made underwear, then I was like, oh, I got to make my own house. Like it was like a snowball. So I just encourage people, especially the slowly evolving to living in a tiny house. I started to kind of question everything. Like, do I need a toilet that flushes? Do I need, these things? And that was huge for me. That was like at the beginning of my 30s. I started to be like, do I need to use conditioner? Can I just use shampoo? Like, did society tell me I had to use conditioner? You know,
Right.
and I think it's important for anybody at any stage of their life to look around you and say, am I doing this for the right reasons
Yeah.
that work for me?
Oh, and I love this. I'm like beaming. I know some of you are, you're just going to listen to this. You're not going to see this, but I am beaming right now. Like I love this. Now I need to make a trip down to North Carolina to see
Yeah.
meet up with Ann.
In Brooksan.
And Roxanne, I know, I'm so excited. I had to pause. I almost said Brooksand, and I'm like, does she live in North Carolina? I think she does, doesn't she? I mean, you
Yeah,
guys
she's like 40 minutes from me.
are okay. Yep. Very nice. So we have another question for you. Let's open this up to anyone who might want to chat with us who's here live. We would love to talk with people. So if you want to come on and chat with us, we'd love for that to happen. Or you can put any comments you want in the chat. We do have a question. The question comes from Carol. Carol says, Anne, does your husband use mostly hand tools or does he have any larger electric tools? And how do you accommodate if you need larger electric demand?
That is a great question. So it's funny because he loves power tools for all the reasons that I love the sewing machine. But he actually, for this studio build, he's been really obsessed with the idea of not using fossil fuels. So instead of renting the auger, he like dug all the holes by hand and he mixed the concrete by hand. But the coolest thing was, so when we first started our off grid, we bought 2 Tesla batteries that had come out of a Tesla car, and those were our principal batteries for our house, which was not enough. So ended up upgrading. But then he took the 2 batteries and basically created a solar generator. And so it's on wheels and it has its own inverter. And so he can charge up the batteries on that generator and then he can wheel it over to his workspace and then he can use that solar energy. So especially for the music studio, he doesn't have electricity up there yet. So he had to figure out a way to bring it. So he would charge it with the solar and then wheel it up. So I thought that was pretty cool. And he's used that a lot.
That is very cool. I have a friend who lives in Alaska right now and she's traveling around Alaska. And so she was talking about she's outfitting her Subaru so that she can travel and work off grid and all those things. So she got I don't think that hers is solar, but it was something like a Jackery. I don't know if you've heard of a Jackery, but like it's a solar generator in essence. So now all of a sudden, like, I think I need a solar generator. And I'm like, what do you need a solar generator for? I'm like, well, what if this is my own conversation to myself, right? I'm like, well, I've got this little camper and I want to go travel all around and I want to work out of it, which I was going to be working out of it for today, but things, life happened and it didn't quite work out. I'm actually going to leave after our conversation, but I do want to, like, the weeks I don't have my little boy, which are hard weeks for me anyway, I want to go and just have big adventures. And I thought, how about that? So I'm like, I think I need a solar generator. I'm pretty
I
sure.
know, right? And he just I mean, basically, he just bought the components
Yeah.
and just mounted them together on a piece of wood that then he can wheel like on a dolly. You know,
Right.
so it was very DIY. But yeah, you can see why we get along so well.
For sure.
Nina,
For
I hate to interrupt, but just so that you know that we have jackeries and we have solar panels, and you
Yes.
can charge your jackery with your solar panel.
Oh.
That's a
You
bummer.
you
Well,
can
you
is that what you said?
No, 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 you can.
Right.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I know, Carol, I've been thinking about that a lot. I've been thinking like, um, maybe not this year, because this year I'm just trying to get settled into my property and to like figure out like all the things to get settled in, but like maybe next year doing some bigger adventures. And I am intrigued by probably I'll purchase a solar generator because I don't know that I have enough electricity knowledge to like do DIY it myself, but I am intrigued by the idea of having something that can travel with me like that that'll allow me to be more mobile. And like what an
Right.
amazing time, really, honestly, in some ways, not all the ways, but what an amazing time to be existing in the world.
I know. And when it was funny because when we built our tiny house, we made sure that we had an all gas stove and oven because we were like, oh, that's the backup plan is the gas cooking. But then when the sun's out, it's almost a waste to cook on the gas. So we did end up buying a little like electric burner that we can use so that we don't have to use the gas.
Right.
Which ideally it would have been nice if that didn't have to like sit on the countertop and we could have built that into this. But at the time we thought, oh, gas is the off-grid technique. But if you up electricity, then that's really kind of the better, or solar electricity, that's kind of the better option.
Yeah. I love it. Any other questions out there anybody would like to ask as we're talking? Carol also says, I think we need to show all of the guests what the magic pants look like. I don't know if we have that option today, but I will definitely put it in the show notes. Do you have one with you, Anne?
I don't think I have any pictures of it with me. So I'm in the Forge Makerspace studio. So this is their beautiful space. We've got this amazing embroidery machine that I've been playing with. So
I could grab my pattern. I just have to run downstairs to get it.
All right, hurry it up, lady.
Okay, you guys talk about something else. Why do that?
Okay, we will. We'll talk amongst ourselves. I love it. And I think it's intriguing too when you're talking about building the tiny house. You love that it was on wheels so that you could just try out this land in essence and see like, did you want to go someplace else? When I bought my little house, it's also on wheels. I was like, I felt like a turtle in a way, like in that I'm like, I have my home that I can just take with me wherever I go, right? I can just bring it with me. And now that I've put it on this land, and this land is going to be maybe forever, I don't know, but at least a good long time. It's got a more permanent foundation and it's here permanently, but it's intriguing. I wonder if you and I have some issues with commitment.
okay. My joke was like, oh, it's the millennial way of buying a house is to like put it on wheels because they like can't decide. And I mean, there is a part of me that's like, well, if I don't ever move it again, was it a waste to put it on wheels? But you can't really split hairs in that way. I mean, for us, it was just, we wanted to figure out how to build our own house, and the tiny house movement was happening, and it was like, oh, okay, this is a way to do this. It's one way to do this. And of course, the subsequent buildings since then have gone up so much easier because we've had the practice.
Yeah.
But you got to start somewhere.
You do. And I think that I think it probably really fits into the do-it-yourself mentality of having options, right? So once your house is on wheels, you kind of feel like you have options. If you need to, and you haven't like put all that effort and time into something that you have to just leave behind and start again. Although there's also a beauty to that, right? Like I would imagine, like what would you do differently if you were going to build the tiny house again?
Well, I mean, our biggest problem is that in the winter, we have really bad condensation issues that result in mold. I don't know if you had any experience with that, but especially like in the northeast corner that's not getting hit by the sunlight, is where we built our stairs, and there's no like airflow back there. And we built this really tight home. And in the winter, you have everything shut, and then you're breathing, you're cooking with gas, and it's producing moisture that's creating problems. So that was pretty stressful, especially because I have a lot of allergies. And part of why I wanted to build a new house was to help me remove allergies. So, I mean, the thing is that we now just have to go back in and figure out how to create venting in the areas that need airflow. And so it's just troubleshooting. But we thought that the wood stove would be enough to offset the moisture. But I mean, we live in a pretty humid place. So it's just kind of something we have to deal with. But I mean, I feel like there's just as many advantages as there's been challenges. Certainly the first 6 months we moved in, it was like all new things. We have the dry toilet, we have the solar power, we had brand new appliances that we didn't know how to use, or like, and so that was a challenge, but it also was thrilling because it was like, we're doing it, we're trying something out, we're seeing if it works.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know, like, this is for like the prepper part of the thing comes in, is that like, so behind me there's a creek. It's not on my property, but it's on the property behind me. And when I put the well in, I'm always thinking of like water security, right? Like, even though I live in Michigan, which is like one of the most secure water states in probably the whole country. But I thought, like, if everything fell apart, what would I do? What would happen? And I'm like, okay, well, I could go down to the creek and we could haul water up, and I've got like a Berkey water filter system. Cause when I lived at my friend's farm, I'd wanted one for ages. And then it was like, oh, I'm just drinking out of her house, right? So I'm like, I need this to like purify my water. So then all of a sudden I got to buy this Berkey that I really enjoyed. And so I love imagining the ways in which it's just a safety. It's a safety thing, right? The ways in which
I'm with you. And it's like, it's funny too, how, like, there's so many different types of people, right? But I like how when you start to get into like prepping, you start to see people from the opposite end of like the political spectrum.
Yes.
And like we have similar interests.
Yeah.
Like we're these things, and
we're so different.
I know. Like we have common ground in certain places, and like, yeah, I remember. So we built this Quonset hut for my studio, and it's a really cool concept because it was designed for military use, where it comes flat packed onto a crate, and then you build these ribs, and then each rib ties into a rib, and you can get a pretty big structure pretty quickly with minimal effort. But I was referencing this blog a lot of this guy who was very like anti-government, and he was like putting it off grid. But I was really relying on his blog because he was saying things that I was looking for help with. And then his blog just ended because he got arrested for like insurrection and went to jail.
Oh no.
And I was like, okay, well.
Yeah, it is. It's a fun place to overlap. And it does make you realize, like, yes, we all have like these really polarizing ideas, but in essence, we're all looking for safety and security. And like, and when you get somebody who gets excited about that, like you and I do, and like other people from the other side of the political spectrum, it's kind of fun.
Yeah. And yeah, we like at our old house, it's like if the electricity went out, we had no water because it was well. And so I felt so helpless. And so moving into the house, we wanted to have like, two ways to do everything. So we have like the wood heat, and then we have like the mini split electric heat. And then two, now with Adam's music studio, it's going to be on its own separate solar system. So like if anything happened to our system, we have another system that we could rely on for power, or vice versa. And then also we've set up the studio power is going to be set up for my studio as well. So we're like planning for the future for that.
I love that. So Carol's back with her magic pants.
Carol,
come on in. And then while she's coming in, before you talk here, Carol, I'm trying to spotlight you. I don't seem to be able to though. Well, come on in when you're ready, Carol.
I can unmute myself, but I don't see where I can
you put your video on?
Video.
Your start video.
So do I just start video?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do that and see what you've got. Perfect.
There she is.
Well, let's see if I can get it to share. You know what?
Let me get you on the spotlight. There we go. Make it a little bit bigger for us. Oh,
You know what? Hang on. I have.
it's very cryptic. This is a very magical way to see it.
Give me spotlight. Cause see, I can't. I have my background blurred, and so it's like blurring
Can you
Oh,
put it?
me.
There it is.
Can you see it at all?
a little bit. It's a little small for us, but there are.
Can you
The
put your head? That's funny.
I can lean my head forward.
Those of you listening, we're having some struggle seeing the magic pants. Carol is valiantly trying to show them to us, but we're not showing.
Now I don't know how to like take.
I don't even know how to blur my background.
Ah, yeah. Hang on.
I was so lucky not to have to do much
There we
Zoom.
go.
And there you are.
Unblurred my background.
So tell us what we're looking at here. What is that? So you said there's no zippers, correct?
Yeah, so this is the technical drawing. So you've got the flap closed on the left side and then the flap open. So there's in the middle picture that square in the middle is a ribbed knit stretch panel. So the idea is that that'll stretch as you bring it over your hips. And then the D-rings attached to the front flap will get secured with a strap that comes from the back. And so that strap has elastic hidden in between it. So when you breathe, when you sit down, when you bend over to tie your shoe, the waist will flex. It'll stay tight, but it'll flex with you as you live your life. And I've actually found where I put multiple snaps on my straps because sometimes I'm a little bigger some parts of the year than the other parts. So you can kind of have it be a little bit looser. And so for me, it's just I ebb and flow so much in my belly that I wanted a pant that was high waisted but would still be comfortable. And so that was the ultimate inspiration. It turns out a lot of other people like that idea. So
So this is made for a woven, non-stretch kind of fabric, correct?
yeah, just that one knit panel in there. And
Yeah.
it's just really to get over your hips. So the pant has been a bigger challenge for those folks who have a very large difference between their waist and hip, because there's only so much that the pant can retract again to give you a slim look.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to cater to everyone perfectly, but
Yes.
I'm trying. I'm pleased with how successful it has been. I also, because the strap pulls from the back to the front, you get a very smooth back side, which I've had a lot of women with full derrieres really enjoyed the smooth back. So,
And I love how you at the back of it you show the
yeah.
making that adjustment. So
Oh, those are so cute. Those look like vintage little illustrations. For those of you, we'll put this into the show notes so that you can see this. For those of you who are listening to the podcast, but these are adorable.
That was actually the inspiration. So when I first started doing the drawings, I started trying to do them in Illustrator like everyone else does. And I was like, too hard. I was like, I just want to draw it. I have a drawing background. So I was like, I just want to draw it. And I had this beautiful 1940s like sewing guide book that had these really whimsical drawings. So I definitely referenced the way that they added that little bit of flair to the imagery. And I'm so much happier with the hand drawn. I just feel like it fits me. I mean, I call myself handmade. So it's like, okay, it's hand, And my favorite class in college was fashion illustration. And I was like, if I could have figured out how to have a job where I got to sketch women, sketch clothes all day, I would. So that was my little chance to have a couple little girls in the back.
That's awesome.
Thanks for sharing, Carol.
oh, no problem.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Looking forward to making them with the stretch denim. So
Yeah, I would just say that if you go too much heavier with the fabric, the pant's going to become tighter, right, with the thicker fabric. So you might want to think about what size you do depending on how thick the fabric is, because I've designed it for linen, and linen kind of relaxes on the body. So if you still want a looser fit and you're working with a thicker material, you might need to give yourself a little extra on the out seams. You know, like you don't necessarily have to go up a whole size, but you could give yourself an extra 1/2 inch on every out seam and then try it on and kind of bring it back in if you need. So just a thought. I could talk about this for forever. So
Very nice. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Anne.
thank you, Tina.
Yes, before we wrap up, we did run over a little bit, which is not surprising. We have so much to talk about. I did want to read this comment from Lisa, and she says, "This is even better than I anticipated. Thank you so much, both of you. I'll probably re-listen on the audio too, so I can catch the last bit." She has to take off now, but she's great.
Aw, that's so nice. The kind words really go far because, you know, when you run your own business, every time I get an email from somebody, I'm like, oh my God, they hate it. I've ruined it. I've disappointed them. And then sometimes I get most of the time, I get really nice comments. But you always remember the negative comments. And I really, really appreciate when people tell me thank you, or not saying that you have to. I'm not begging for compliments, but I'm just saying if you see someone doing something that's small business, like encouraging them goes a long way. We all need encouragement to keep going.
For sure. I love it. So, Anne, where can folks look at your patterns and see what you're up to?
Yes, so I have my own website called tilleyhandmade.com, and there you can find my patterns for sale. You can see some of my textile art. You can find my YouTube videos where I have sew-alongs, as well as just fun sewing creative content, and also classes that I'm teaching. And then I'm mostly on Instagram. I ebb and flow with my motivation. Again, I don't pressure myself to post every day. I try to keep it natural. And then I do have some patterns in some local fabric stores. So I do have one in like upstate New York, one in California, mostly in North Carolina and Tennessee. But you know, if your local fabric store might want to carry my stuff, you know, doesn't hurt to throw my name out there. It's just me, so it would just be me mailing them patterns, and that's working for me right now. So
very nice. Oh, and thank you so much for being here. One last comment to read, and then we're gonna jump off. Carol also says, "Anne, I love your details when you shipped my pattern, the little drawings and verbiage."
I did. I draw on all of my packages. I used to put stickers on it, but then I couldn't find the right stickers, so then I had to. I love sending packages and snail mail and stuff. So, but yeah, I print all the patterns. I fold every one of them. I put them in the envelope. I ship everything. So it's very much just me in my house. And yeah, I appreciate all y'all's support.
Very nice. Have a wonderful day. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for being here. And
yeah, until next time. Thank you so much, Tina.
yes, thank you.
All right. Bye, guys.